All right. So there's the positive case from the Bible in general, history and how God has set things up and what pleases him on the national level over time in Israel. And then there's the argument from household order. Now let's look at church order. 1 Corinthians 11, 1 through 16. 1 Corinthians 11, 1 through 16. So we'll just take a look at that so that we're all on the same page. 1 Corinthians 11, 1 through 16. So here Paul says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. So now he's saying, okay, this has everything to do with Christ's authority and what he wants done. Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions even as I delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head... Now, this word, real quick. This word that is translated in the English Standard Version as wife, it's the same word as a woman. And so it's used of a wife, of a woman. You see here of the church as united by Christ, all that sort of thing. But the main meaning is a woman. So the idea of, this being woman versus man or wife versus husband, really it should be consistent through here. And this is an interpretive leap. And you see how often it's the same word, gune. So let's look. Here, gune. Here, gune. So it switches up. So the translators of the English Standard Version, for some reason, switched it up. And I think it must be because the woman is to be submissive to her own husband. But then you have the general principle of the woman is the glory of man, the man is the image of the glory of God, and all these things. So even if you want to translate part of it as wife and husband and part of it as woman, man, the principle at play here is that whoever the male is and whatever relational dynamic it is, the general rule is that it goes God the Father, God the Son, man, woman. And that's just the way it is. So you can split hairs over how to translate it, but that's just the case. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. So there again, if this is going to be husband, wife through here, then this shouldn't be man. This should be husband, 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 and so on. But it is what it is. For if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. So if the hair is the covering, then the idea here would be if a wife will not keep long hair, then she should cut her hair short. But since it's disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or to shave her head, let her have hair on her head or cover her head. So it doesn't make sense to say that a woman's hair or long hair is her covering. This is some sort of veil. This is some sort of head covering. This is a katakalupto, and so it is not the same thing as hair. This is a definite piece of fabric or something like that. And that might be different in any given society. You might have a veil. You might have just a like a little covering just to show it's a sign of submission. It's not a fashion statement or anything like that, although it can be fashionable. But anyway, so if a wife will not have hair on her head, she should cut the hair off her head. But since it's disgraceful for a wife to cut the hair off of her head, then let her have hair on her head. For a man ought not to have hair on his head, since he is the image and glory of God. So none of this works if it's only hair. It's got to be a covering. So he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. For man was not made for woman, but woman from man. So man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. So we're just layering up these reasons why a woman should have a sign of authority over her head when she's praying or prophesying. All right. That is why a woman or a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. So there's another positive argument. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man nor man of woman. So now we're going from economy to an intrinsic value. And so Paul is saying that there is an economic aspect of, how things are to work, and that's reflected in the Trinity, and it's also reflected in the order of, man bearing the image and glory of God, and then woman being in the, carrying something of the glory of man. So it's all I'm going to say, for lack of a better term, a descending economy of greater to lesser in some sense. But it's not an ontological, it's not a matter of being that therefore men are better things or intrinsically more valuable or intrinsically more created in God's image than women. So Paul makes this clear too. And the fact that he makes this clear strengthens the argument that there is a definite order. If he hadn't said anything about this, then we could say that it had something to do with ontological value or the issue of being, but he parses it out and he makes a point about it. So we can say that everything that came before did not have to do with personal value, but it did have to do with order. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman. And all things are from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? So the idea here is that the expected answer is no. Does not nature itself, so here's another reason, teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? What's that word? It is a atimia, a dishonor, a disgrace, or a shame. And it has the idea of making one infamous, infamously disgraceful, or vile. So this is a very strong word for this move against God's paradigm for maleness. It's a disgrace for him. But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For her hair is given to her for a covering. If anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the churches of God. All right, so for her hair is given to her for a covering. See how that's not the same word as catakalypto. That's not the same thing here. Let her catakalypto her head versus paraboleon. And so for her hair is given to her for a covering, a natural covering. Nature shows it, therefore you should have a veil or a catakalypto. And if anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice. So that's Paul and maybe the Corinthians, nor do the churches of God. Now, this word church is often misunderstood. This is an assembly. And in the Old Testament, when it talked about the assembly of the Israelites, the authors of the Septuagint used the same word, ecclesia. And so this is the assembled people who truly are faithful and are members of God's family. So those who truly belong. So this would be the invisible congregation of true believers. And so we have no such practice, nor do the ecclesias, assemblies of God. And if you, again, this is the same word for the assembled people of God in the Old Testament, the assembled people of God in the New Testament. It is consistent across the board. Those are truly believers. So there again, we're spanning space and time with the traditions, maintain the traditions even as I delivered them to you, and we have no other practice anywhere, ever. All right, so let's go back here and look at the notes and just break it down and make a few points. So in verses 1 and 2 of 1 Corinthians 11, Paul is referencing imitating Christ and perpetuating traditions which pre-existed the Corinthian congregation. It's not a specific new instruction for their specific context. He's not saying you have all these women that are getting usurpacious. Again, like the wives in Ephesus was not an issue of just the people in Ephesus. And so this has to do with, generally speaking, imitating Christ and the traditions which have always been passed down. In verse 3, the general order in view, which informs the specific instructions that follow, is given as God the Father over Christ, Christ over man, and then man over woman. So in the fact that God over Christ is included, and knowing that Christ is God and is co-eternal and equal with the Father and Spirit in substance, so that's that ontological being, we can conclude that we are talking about proper order and function, not the intrinsic value of beings in question. So if you bring up 1 Corinthians 11 and say, like, here's a good example of where there's male headship as a general overarching paradigm in everything, and somebody says, well, you're just saying that because you think women are inferior. You can go, no, actually, it's included in the text that that is not the case. All right, so verses 4 through 16, and we'll break these down with the reasons that are provided there by Paul. The general order should be visibly expressed via a sign of authority. It shouldn't just be assumed that people are going to catch on to this, but it should be a very distinct sign of authority that people can actually see. And when somebody asks, hey, why do all the women have their head covered? You can say, because it's a symbol of authority. It's part of our cultural fabric that we want observers to see and to know, not just to infer or at some point to learn. So for a woman to lack a sign of authority on her head while praying or prophesying is disgraceful. And this word in Greek is iskros, and it means filthy, base, or dishonorable. So there's nothing good about it. It's not a gentle word. It's actually a pretty strong word. And here again, speaking of every woman generically, not specific Corinthian women. See that in verse 5. It's speaking ordinally, as man being the image and glory of God and woman being the glory of man. So there's a definite order of or rank, or however you want to say it. You know, a lot of people will get offended by however you say that there's an order or an economy in life, but that's just the way it is. So they're speaking ordinally. They're reasoning ordinally from the paradigm in creation, 8 and 9, verses 8 and 9. And a positive argument is made because of the angels. So even if we don't fully understand whether this means when messengers visit the church from outside, they'll be able to see it, or the angelic beings that accompany the worship of God and that oversee the affairs of kingdoms and that are guardians to individuals in the church, that, you know, because God accounts man as higher in rank than the angels, it would be a strange thing for men to flagrantly disregard God's expectations, and the angels have to sit there through it. So out of regard for the angelic beings that oversee and perfectly obey God, we ought to also obey God as even higher creatures. So I think that's very plausible. So even if we don't agree with that, even if we don't fully understand what it means, it is nonetheless a positive argument for male headship and why women should have a symbol of authority on their heads. And then in verse 6 and then 13 through 15, Paul argues from nature and from natural intuition as generally understood. And this goes back to Deuteronomy there again, that men should have a certain look and appearance and have a certain natural inclination towards work and war and protection and things like that. And women have a natural softness and grace and things like that. And you want to accentuate those things in each person, and they should be dressed accordingly. Here again, the outward appearance has everything to do with the substance of the inward person. And then the overall argument is once again bookended by verse 16 and a parallel in verse 2, citing uniform general practice throughout all of the churches of God. So verse 2 and verse 16, let's look at that again. I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions even as I delivered them to you. So this is a general scope of traditions for everyone everywhere. And then in verse 16, if anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the churches of God. General principle, tradition for everyone everywhere. General principle, tradition for everyone everywhere. Let's look at this. Quarrelsome, if you want to argue over this, if you want to dispute this, sorry, we have no such practice. We have no such custom. So here again, you have the traditions, and then you have the customs. So it's different words, the same general idea. It's like he's repeating himself over and over and over to make a strong point about this concept, and yet we, for some reason, decide that it's a fuzzy concept or something like that, or we want to explain it away. So let me make a few comments here on women praying and prophesying. So based on 1 Timothy 2 and 1 Corinthians 14, we know that in some sense, women are to remain silent in congregational worship services. So in some sense, they have a lesser speaking role, either at some point in the service or in the general scope of the service or in particular sacramental things, pastoral preaching, things like that. In some sense, women are to take a quieter role in the worship of the church. So Paul may be speaking here about personal devotion rather than the corporate meetings of the church, but arguing from the lesser to the greater. If a sign of authority is required when a woman is in private devotion, how much more then should there be a sign of submission in the general scope of worship in the larger congregation? So if she's by herself in her prayer closet and this is required, then how much more is it required when she's in public? Now, in the qualification for elders given in 1 Timothy and in Titus, note that prophecy is not a prerequisite. Prophecy is not a prerequisite, but teaching is. So the fact that women are prophesying either in public or in private, either way, it has no bearing on pastoral leadership or being an ordained elder or leader in the church. The emphasis on being under authority as a general practice remains unmistakable, even if you want to split hairs or talk about the fact that, women prophesy. Okay, well, fair enough. That has no bearing on pastoral leadership or being an ordained elder, presbyter, bishop, however you want to say it, preacher, teacher in the church.